February 19, 1943, Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The math said he should be dead. By the end of the day, history said otherwise. The pass was only 3 kilometers wide. Rock walls on both sides. Loose shale underfoot. Cold air trapped between ridges that funneled sound and gunfire forward and back like a tunneled AT-0615 hours. German artillery began walking rounds into the American defensive line, not probing fire. Not ranging shots, deliberate. Measured. Corrected. The men of the WW2 Corps had been in North Africa for less than 3 months. Many had never heard incoming fire before Tunisia. They learned quickly. The first shells landed short. The second bracketed. The third struck trucks, radios, and command tents. BY0630. The road through the pass was clogged with burning vehicles. Private First Class James Red McAllister lay prone behind a limestone outcrop on the southern slope. Elevation 780 meters. He could see the road below. He could see German infantry forming in staggered columns, moving with discipline, using the rock folds the Americans hadn't known to watch. McAllister was 24 years old. 5 feet 10 inches. 168 pounds with a full kit. Carrying a modified Thompson submachine gun. Modified was the word the ordnance paperwork used. Improvised was the word everyone else used. .2 barrels. Parallel. Bolted to a reinforced receiver housing. Twin compensators. 2 triggers tied to a single mechanical linkage. IT fired .45 ACP from paired 30-round box magazines. Both barrels cycled simultaneously. .60 rounds per pull. 600 rounds per minute per barrel. 1,200 rounds per minute combined. Ammunition exhaustion was not a risk. It was a certainty. The weapon had arrived with McAllister's platoon 10 days earlier, delivered in a crate-marked test, returned to Aberdeen. It had been intended for evaluation. Controlled firing. Measured dispersion. No combat use authorized. Kasserine Pass erased authorization. The Germans had already broken through American units to the north. The southern slope was now exposed. If it fell, the pass fell. If the pass fell, the road to Tebessa opened. Supply depots. Fuel. Hospitals. McAllister's platoon had been reduced to 17 men. 1 radio. 1 machine gun with a cracked feed tray. And the experimental Thompson AT-0647 hours, German infantry began their ascent. They moved in bounds of 10 to 15 meters. Riflemen forward. MP-40 gunners behind. A light mortar team setting up near a dry waddy. McAllister's breathing slowed. He counted steps. Distance closed from 220 meters to 140. The Thompson was not designed for range. It was designed for rooms. 4 doorways. For 10 meters or less. The twin barrels made it worse. The dispersion doubled. The recoil was brutal. The weapon climbed even with compensators, but at close range. Volume replaced precision. AT-0732 hours. The platoon lieutenant gave the order, fire. The first burst lasted 1 second. 20 rounds per barrel. 40 rounds total. The sound was not a single report. It was a tearing noise. Fabric ripping under tension. The front German element went down immediately. Not all dead. Some were wounded. Some were stunned. The rock face amplified the noise and flattened direction. German troops ducked instinctively. Unsure of the weapon's location. McAllister released the trigger. The barrel smoked instantly. He ejected both magazines. Hands shaking. Inserted fresh ones. His shoulders already ached. The Germans recovered quickly. They always did. A squad peeled right. Another hugged the left wall. A mortar round landed 50 meters uphill. Shrapnel cut through brush and stone. McAllister fired again. Shorter this time. Half-second burst. 20 rounds. .1 magazine jammed on the left feed. He slapped it, cleared it, and fired again. The twin system had no redundancy. 1 jam slowed both barrels. Below, a German NCO was shouting orders. The mortar team adjusted. Another shell landed closer. 10 meters. McAllister tasted dust and cordite. BY0810 hours. He had fired 12 magazines. 720 rounds expended. Barrels too hot to touch. Receiver blistering paint. The Germans had lost momentum but not numbers. More infantry appeared from the North Road. A half-track idled behind a bend. Mounting in milligram 34, the lieutenant was hit at 0817. Chest. No last words. Command passed to a sergeant with a map soaked in blood and sweat. Hold, he said. Nothing more. McAllister lay behind the rock, heart pounding hard enough to shake his sight picture. His arms trembled. The weapon felt heavier each minute. He had 4 magazines left. .240 rounds to AT-0834. The .34 opened fire. The rock chipped. Fragments cut his cheek. The mortar fired again. McAllister waited until the German assault element was committed. Until they closed to under 50 meters. Until retreat would cost them more than advance. Then he stood. He braced Thompson against the stone. Both triggers depression. A full second of fire. The twin barrel screamed. German survivors later described it as being caught in overlapping fire from 2 weapons they could not see. Some called it Doppeltod. Double death. Not as a name. As a description. AT-0841 hours. The assault stalled completely. Smoke drifted upward. Spent brass covered the rock shelf. McAllister collapsed back into cover, hands numb, vision narrowing. He had 2 magazines left, and the Germans were not finished. T-0848 hours. The .34 shifted fire. No suppression now. Search. The gunner walked rounds along the rock face, methodical, cutting elevation by centimeters. Stone dust filled the air. McAllister pressed his helmet into the limestone, jaw clenched, ears ringing even between bursts. He had 2 magazines left. 60 rounds each. 120 total. The Thompson's barrels glowed dull red beneath the compensators. Oil burned off in wisps. He could smell it through the dust, hot metal and scorched lubricant. Below, German infantry reorganized. They did not rush. They spread. .1 element moved downslope, angling wide, using dead ground to approach from the left. Another stayed pinned near the waddy, trading occasional rifle fire to keep American heads down. The half-track crept forward 10 meters at a time, .34 firing in disciplined bursts to conserve ammunition and maintain pressure. This was no longer an assault. It was reduced. The American platoon had no depth. No reserves. The crack machine gun jammed again and fell silent. Riflemen fired sporadically, conserving rounds. Knowing resupply was impossible. McAllister checked his watch. 0902 hours. He had been firing and reloading for over 90 minutes. His arms burned constantly now. The recoil of the twin barrels transmitted straight into his shoulders and collarbones. Each burst felt like being struck repeatedly with a hammer. His hands were blistered where the foregrip vibrated against skin. A mortar round landed behind him, close. Too close, shrapnel tore through the brush and ricocheted off stone. One fragment punched through his web gear and lodged in the canvas. Another cut across his left forearm. Not deep. Bleeding anyway. He wiped it on his sleeve. No time to bind. The sergeant crawled over, shouting into the noise. Half-track's moving up. We can't stop it with rifles. McAllister nodded. He already knew. The twin-barrel Thompson was not designed to penetrate armor. But at close range, sustained fire could shred exposed crew, optics, and tires. If it got closer. The half-track advanced again. 40 meters. 35. Its front armor angled, driver hunched low. The .34 raked the slope, forcing American riflemen to ground. McAllister rose to a kneeling position. He rested the Thompson on the rock. The barrels sagged slightly under their own weight. He adjusted his stance, planting his boots wider, bracing for recoil he could barely control anymore. Distance. 30 meters. He fired. Both barrels roared. Continuous fire. Not bursts now. Brass poured out in a steady stream, clattering against stone. The recoil forced the muzzle up despite his weight behind it. He fought it down, jaw clenched, eyes watering, rounds smashed into the half-track's open troop compartment. The .34 stopped firing abruptly. The vehicle swerved, tires shredded. Momentum carrying it forward another 3 meters before it ground to a halt. McAllister held the trigger until the sound changed. Click, silence. Both magazines are empty. He dropped behind the rock, chest heaving. His vision tunneled. For a moment, he thought he might pass out. He had no loaded magazines left. Below, the Germans reacted instantly. Infantry surged forward, recognizing the pause. Rifle fire intensified. A grenade arced up the slope, bounced once, and exploded 10 meters short. The sergeant shouted again. We are dry on the gun. We are dry. McAllister fumbled at his belt. One last partial magazine, 20 rounds at most. He slammed it home. The Thompson's bolt slammed forward sluggishly, springs weakened by heat. German infantry were now within 20 meters, faces visible. Expressions clear. Orders shouted in German. McAllister stood. No bracing now. No cover. He fired. Thompson bucked violently. The partial magazine emptied in less than a second. The weapon jammed at the last round, bolt locked halfway forward, metal warped from heat. The Germans halted again, instinct overriding training. But only for seconds. McAllister dropped the Thompson. It hit stone with a dull, heavy sound. He drew his M1911 pistol, 8 rounds in the magazine. One chambered .8 rounds. The German surged again. Then, from the road behind the pass, a new sound cut through the gunfire. Engines multipled at AT-0919 hours. American tank destroyers from the 601st Battalion entered the western mouth of Kasserine Pass. M3 GMCs, open-topped, thin-skinned, but armed with 75mm guns. The first round slammed into the stalled half-track, detonating its ammunition. German infantry broke and scattered. Discipline finally yielding to survival. McAllister sank back against the rock, pistol still in hand, chest heaving, ears ringing. He did not cheer. He did not speak. He stared at the ruined Thompson lying beside him, barrels blackened, warped beyond repair. The math had said he should be dead, but at 0927 hours, the firing began to fade, and McAllister was still breathing. AT-0935 hours. The pass went quiet in stages, not silence. Never silence. Artillery thumped far to the east. Engines idled. Occasional rifle shots echoed as German rear elements disengaged, firing to discourage pursuit. The Americans did not chase. No one gave the order. No one had the strength. McAllister sat where he had fallen, back against the limestone, knees pulled up slightly to keep pressure off his lower spine. His hands shook uncontrollably now that the firing had stopped. Adrenaline bled away fast, leaving weight and pain behind. His hearing came back unevenly. First a ringing, then voices, then the wind. A medic reached him at 0948. The cut on his forearm was cleaned and wrapped. The medic asked about burns. McAllister shook his head once. Talking felt unnecessary. His shoulders throbbed deeply, the ache already settling into muscle and joint. The medic glanced at the weapon lying beside him. "What the hell is that?" McAllister did not answer. He was watching the road. The M3 tank destroyers had halted near the bend. Crews stood exposed in the open fighting compartments, scanning the ridgelines. One vehicle had a dented shield from shrapnel. Another leaked coolant steadily onto the dust. German casualties lay scattered below the slope. Some still moved. Others did not. No one went down to check. The pass was technically held, but it was not secure. That word did not apply here. T-1015 hours. An American staff officer arrived with 2 runners and a radio team. He walked the line slowly, counting men, asking short questions, writing nothing down. When he reached McAllister, he stopped again at the Thompson. He crouched, touched the receiver, pulled his hand back quickly from the heat still trapped in the metal. "Who fired this?" The sergeant answered. "Not McAllister." The officer nodded once. No comment. No praise. Just another fact in a day full of them. By noon, German pressure had shifted north. Kasserine Pass remained contested, but the immediate threat on the southern slope had passed. Ammunition trucks arrived cautiously. Water followed. Medics moved the wounded downslope in pairs. McAllister finally stood at 1230 hours. His legs protested immediately. He swayed once, caught himself on the rock, then straightened. The Thompson was left where it lay until an ordnance team could reach it. No one tried to move it. The metal had fused in places. The twin barrels were no longer paralleled. He drank half a canteen and felt sick almost instantly. T-1400 hours. The platoon, what remained of it, was ordered to fall back to a secondary line 1 kilometer west. McAllister walked the distance slowly, pack redistributed among survivors, helmet riding low on his brow. They passed burned vehicles. Dead mules. A shattered radio truck still smoldering. The smell of fuel and cordite lingered everywhere. No one talked about the morning. That night, temperatures dropped sharply. The desert cold returned as it always did. McAllister lay under a blanket, staring at the sky, replaying distances and timings without intending to. 50 meters. 30. The pause before the engines. The click when the magazines ran dry. Sleep came in fragments. On February 20th, German forces renewed attacks elsewhere along the line. Kasserine Pass would change hands again before the battle ended. Strategic lessons would be written later. Careers would rise and fall because of this place, but for McAllister, The war narrowed again to immediate concerns. Weapon issued, replacement M1 rifle. Ammunition, standard load. Orders, hold when told. Move when told. The twin-barrel Thompson was gone by morning, crated and tagged for return. The paperwork would list it as combat damage beyond repair. No further. Explanation required. German reports from the engagement mentioned. Unexpected high-volume automatic fire from an elevated American position that stalled an infantry. Advance and disabled a half-track. No weapon type identified. No emphasis placed, just another anomaly in a confused battle. McAllister would not learn the phrase double death until months later, overheard from an intelligence officer translating captured notes. By then, the moment had already passed into memory. At Kasserine. Survival did not feel like victory. It felt like wait, and the war moved on. On February 21, 1943. At 0430 hours, McAllister was awake before the order came. The night had been restless. The ground was too cold. The air carried engine noise from far off, armor shifting positions, supply columns feeling for roads in the dark. At first light, the Americans withdrew again, not a rout. A controlled pullback. Maps folded. Routes memorized and then abandoned. The Kasserine battlefield was no longer a single place. It stretched across valleys and ridgelines, broken into dozens of small actions that bled into each other. Units overlapped. Orders arrived late or not at all. Radio traffic jammed with overlapping call signs. McAllister's platoon was now down to 11 men. The sergeant gathered them at 0610. He spoke quietly. No speeches. No reassurance. German armor pushing south. We hold this line until noon or until told otherwise. The line was a shallow ridge overlooking a dry basin. No prepared positions. Just scraped earth and rocks stacked by hand. McAllister helped dig until his forearms cramped again. The cut from the day before had stiffened overnight. Day T0745 hours. German reconnaissance elements appeared on the far side of the basin. Armored cars. Infantry moving cautiously behind them. This was not yesterday's assault. This was testing. McAllister lay prone with his M1 rifle, counting rounds. 8 in the clip. He fired twice at distant movement. No visible effect. The Germans withdrew again, pressure without commitment. By mid-morning, the sky filled with aircraft. German dive bombers passed overhead, not attacking, just visible enough to remind everyone they were there. American fighters were absent. Fuel shortages. Command confusion. The reasons did not matter to the men on the ground. T1130 hours. The order finally came: withdraw west. Immediate. They moved in bounds, one element covering while the other pulled back. McAllister was in the rear group. He fired twice more, deliberately, to keep German heads down. Then he ran. His legs felt heavy. Every step jarred his shoulders. The desert seemed to stretch longer than it should have. They reached the next position at 12:30. There, the war paused again for 2 days. McAllister and what remained of his unit dug, watched, waited. German attacks focused elsewhere. The American command reorganized under pressure. Officers were replaced. Units reshuffled. Lessons learned the hard way were written into orders with blunt language. On February 24, McAllister was called to battalion headquarters. He expected discipline. A reprimand. A question about the weapon. Instead, he was asked to describe, in exact detail, what had happened on the southern slope on the 19th. Distances. Durations. How long the weapon fired before overheating. How often it jammed. What failed first? He answered carefully. Not to impress. Not to dramatize. Just facts. The officer taking notes stopped him twice to clarify timing. Once to ask how many magazines he had carried. Once to ask whether he had been ordered to use the experimental weapon. McAllister said no. The officer nodded again. Wrote that down too. The interview lasted 20 minutes. The end, the officer said only, "You did what you had." McAllister was dismissed. An O citation followed. No ceremony. The battle was still ongoing. Recognition could wait. Survival took priority. On February 25, American forces began a broader withdrawal from Kasserine. The pass was conceded. Strategically, it was the correct decision. Tactically, it felt like a loss. McAllister marched west with blistered feet and an empty stomach. Trucks passed going the other way, bringing fresh units forward. Some men waved. Some stared. He wondered briefly if the twin-barrel Thompson would be mentioned again. If the Germans would talk about it. If anyone would care. Then the thought passed. On March 6th, near Thala, McAllister's unit saw combat again. This time with artillery support. With air cover. With clearer orders. The Germans were stopped. Then pushed back. The war did not hinge on one weapon. Or one man. Or one slope of rock. But decisions made under pressure mattered. McAllister would carry the physical effects for weeks. Shoulder pain that made sleep difficult. Tingling in his hands from repeated shock. The medic said it would fade. Mostly, it did. Psychological pressure lingered longer. Sudden noises. The memory of the click when the Thompson ran dry. The certainty, in that moment, that he was out of options. He did not speak about it. April. The North African campaign turned decisively. German forces retreated. Tunisia would fall in May. New operations would follow. Sicily. Italy. France. McAllister would be there, but Kasserine stayed with him, not as a victory. Not as a legend. As a moment when the math failed. On March 12, 1943, McAllister collapsed during a march, not dramatically. No shout. No fall into dust. His legs simply stopped responding. The column halted while a medic checked him. Pulse rapid. Skin clammy. Hands trembling again, though the fighting that day had been light. The medic asked how long he'd been sleeping. McAllister did not answer at first. He did not know that he was pulled from the line and sent back to a field hospital near Le Kef. Canvas tents. Mud floors. The smell of antiseptic fighting the smell of men who had been in the same clothes for weeks. The diagnosis was blunt exhaustion. Muscle trauma. Nervous strain. No evacuation. No long rest. Just 48 hours on a cot and orders to drink water whether he felt thirsty or not. Lying there, McAllister replayed the sounds more than the sights. The tearing roar of the twin barrels. The sudden absence of sound when the magazines ran dry. The engines that arrived just before it ended. Other wounded men talked at night. Some relieved tankets. Some screamed in their sleep. McAllister stayed quiet. When he slept, it was shallow and brief. On March 15th, he rejoined his unit. They were thinner now. Replacements filled the gaps. New faces. New voices. The sergeant was still there. He nodded once when McAllister returned. Nothing more. The war in Tunisia ground toward its conclusion. German forces fell back steadily, compressed against the coast. Prisoners came in daily. Some were barely older than McAllister. Others looked relieved to be done. In late April, McAllister saw the twin-barrel Thompson one last time. T-sat in a maintenance area near Gafsa, half disassembled, tagged with multiple inspection cards. An ordnance captain stood with two engineers, gesturing at the warped receiver and fused barrel mounts. McAllister was not invited into the discussion. He stood 10 meters away, waiting for his platoon to move out, and watched them handle it with gloved hands. One engineer shook his head slowly. The captain scribbled something and closed the folder. The weapon would not be rebuilt. The concept was noted. The limitations were obvious. Ammunition consumption. Heat. Weight. Control. What it had done at Kasserine was not repeatable under normal conditions, and that was the point. On May 7, 1943, Tunis fell. German resistance collapsed soon after. North Africa was secured. There was no celebration in McAllister's unit. Just orders. Cleaning weapons. Preparing to move again. That night, someone produced a bottle taken from a surrendered depot. It passed quietly. When it reached McAllister, he drank once and handed it on. Later, lying on the ground under a clear sky, he thought again of the slope at Kasserine. Of the count in his head. Of the certainty that had settled in when the weapon failed. He had expected fear instead. He had felt calculation. Distance. Time. Ammunition. When the calculation ended. So did the options. That knowledge stayed with him. In Sicily. In Italy. Later still, in France. He never again held a weapon that fired like that. Nothing else ever matched the sheer violence of those seconds. But nothing else ever required it either. Some men carried scars you could see. Others carried numbers. McAllister carried the memory of how close the margin had been. In July 1944, outside St. Lo, a German artillery barrage pinned his unit in a hedgerow for 6 hours. When it ended, a younger soldier beside him began to shake uncontrollably, unable to stand. McAllister grabbed him by the webbing. "Count what you have," he said. "Count the seconds. It ends." The soldier nodded, breathing hard, and did as told. They survived. McAllister survived the war. No medals tied to Kasserine. No official mention of the weapon in his file. Just a service record marked by campaigns and dates. After 1945, he went home. I took a factory job. Married. Slept poorly for years, sometimes. Late at night, he heard the tearing sound again, sometimes. He remembered the silence that followed. That silence mattered. After the war, the reports were written in offices far from Tunisia. Typed. Filed. Cross-referenced. Kasserine Pass became a case study, taught not for heroics, but for failure. Poor coordination. Inexperienced leadership. Misuse of terrain. Underestimation of an enemy who did not forgive. Mistakes, the twin barrel. Thompson appeared only once in the documentation. Point 1. Paragraph, filed under Field Expedient and Experimental. Weapons, Combat Observation. The language was precise. The weapon demonstrated extreme short-range firepower but suffered from uncontrollable recoil, rapid overheating, excessive ammunition consumption, and mechanical failure under sustained fire, not recommended for further development. No names attached. No location specified, just facts. T Aberdeen Proving Ground. Ordnance engineers reached the same conclusions without firing a shot in anger. Their calculations showed what McAllister had felt in his shoulders and hands. Physics did not bend for courage. Heat, mass, recoil, and supply always won in the end. The German phrase, Doppeltod, never appeared in Allied records. It surfaced only in post-war interviews with Afrika Korps veterans, usually mentioned in passing, often without certainty. A strange American gun. Too loud. Too much fire. Then gone. Historians would later note that no army adopted twin-barrel submachine guns for general issue. Firepower scaled better through teams, not individuals. Control mattered more than volume. Endurance mattered more than shock. What happened at Kasserine did not change doctrine, but it clarified it. For McAllister, the impact was quieter. He never spoke publicly about Tunisia. When asked about the war, he answered in generalities. North Africa was hot. Italy was wet. France was complicated. He avoided specifics. In the 1960s, a military historian wrote to him once, asking about experimental weapons. McAllister read the letter, folded it carefully, and never replied, not out of secrecy, out of disinterest. The moment had already done its work. He lived long enough to see the Thompson become a museum piece. Behind glass. Clean. Inert. Sometimes he paused in front of one, noting the weight, the familiar lines. He never touched it. The twin-barrel version was never displayed. It remained a footnote, if remembered at all. Too impractical to celebrate. Too effective, briefly, to ignore. Kasserine Pass itself changed little. Wind still moved through the rock walls. Roads shifted. Markers were placed. Tourists rarely came. The slope where McAllister fired was never marked. There was no reason to. Wars are not shaped by singular weapons or singular men, but by what survives and what fails. The twin-barrel Thompson failed as a system, but for a few minutes on February 19, 1943, it worked long enough. That is why the story matters, not because it created a legend. Not because it rewrote history, but because it shows how narrow the margin can be between collapse and endurance, and how sometimes, under unbearable pressure, survival depends on tools never meant to be used that way. By people who never expected to rely on them. The math said he should have been dead. History recorded that he was not.